Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Corporate Learning, a Flipped Classroom Model. Before we begin, I'd like to cover just a few items regarding this webinar platform. At the bottom of your screen, you'll notice a handful of widgets, mainly the Q&A widget, which you can utilize to submit any questions you have throughout today's webinar session. For viewing purposes, you can also expand your viewing window by clicking on the icon found on the top right corner of the slide viewer. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget. And lastly, do take a moment to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. At this time, I'll turn it over to your presenters, Jill and Dave.
Thanks, Olivia. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. This webinar presentation on the corporate classroom, Flipping the Classroom, is brought to you by Insight in partnership with Siemens. Insight, we create meaningful experiences that help businesses run smarter. As your super solution integrator, we can help with your entire technology stack, from strategy and planning to purchasing, connecting your workforce, implementation, to adoption and optimization. We're here to help. I'm Jill Blasey with Insight Digital Innovation, Transformation Services, Learning and Development Group. I've been in the education field for a really long time. I've been with the Insight organization for about 22 years. I spent my formative years at Eastern Illinois University, and in my years with Insight, I've done pretty much everything that we do from an education perspective, starting off as a classroom trainer, getting into IT training management. I've also worked with our healthcare partnership programs, working very closely with partnership development, and most recently as a senior performance consultant, where I work closely with clients such as Dave at Siemens to help design and strategize to solve problems and help develop the right solutions to ensure that training is implemented efficiently and effectively. A little bit about me. Dave, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm David Santo. I'm the Siemens leader of the Mechanical Center of Competency. We help our branches get into the mechanical business, and as part of my role as the leader, I do an extensive amount of training. I was introduced to Jill and Insight when we wanted to revamp our training, and we actually did that right before COVID hit. And fortunately, we did this flipped classroom, which you're going to hear about today, and it really helped us not skip a beat as COVID hit, and we had to do a lot of remote training. Been in the industry for about 25 years, the last 10 here at Siemens. And happy to talk today about the experience that we had setting this up and how it benefited our business.
Thanks so much, Dave, and thank you, 1,000 thank yous for joining us today to talk about the partnership. And thanks to all of you for joining us today on our joint partnership presentation. Just to kind of set the stage, let's go ahead and kick off with a quick poll. Why don't you go ahead and from the poll selections, give us an idea of what % of your current learning you're currently delivering virtually. And I'll give you about 20 seconds or so to do that.
I think they have to hit submit afterwards or else it won't populate the graph.
Thank you, everybody. Please make sure you hit submit. Everybody go ahead and submit your answers. I'm going to close out the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, here we go. So about about 11% are delivering 10% or less, about 5%, 26 to 50%, and then we get into the big numbers, 96 to 100%, 66%, which, you know, as we are in kind of our new generation of learning and our new normal, we're experiencing that we do spend most of our time in a virtual delivery perspective just because people haven't returned to work. So this is about what we had anticipated seeing, and I appreciate everybody playing along with that. And we're finding that since the onset of the pandemic, learners are spending about 30% more time during their months in learning activities. This means that as learning and development professionals, it's really important for us to provide the learning to ensure that our teams are spending their time efficiently and effectively. And we really believe that the flipped classroom methodology is a great tool to use to ensure that our people are spending their valuable time on the learning that will be most impactful to their jobs on a day-to-day basis. Dave, do you see this playing true with your teams as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for me, it ended up being 100% of my time. So I didn't answer the survey, but for sure, almost everything we're doing, since we're not able to travel, is remote. Not just the flipped classroom, but we have a lot of need for support, and we're having to do that and teach people over the phone and screen using Teams or other methodologies. Yep.
And if we kind of do a comparison from today versus January 2020, January, just a few months ago, about 10% of all training was delivered, or 67% of all training was delivered in person. Now it's 10% or less. And actually, I was very surprised recently when I was on a call with a client, and actually it was another group at Siemens, where they are actually delivering some training in person. That was the first client that I had talked to that is doing still some in-person delivery. So as we talk about kind of flipping the classrooms and working in a virtual environment, although development is a bit different. We're finding there's quite a bit more deliverables required with virtual delivery. And of course, delivery is obviously quite a bit different. We're finding that we're really able to educate more learners virtually at a lower cost and still able to provide a very high quality learner experience with excellent knowledge transfer. Since a lot of the learning in a flipped classroom methodology takes place outside of the virtual classroom, it gives the opportunity for students to really think about the information and apply it. We're finding that adapting to the new normal is really vital in keeping business moving forward. We can't bring the organizations to their knees. We still have to provide that quality training, whether it be soft skills, technology, leadership, to really drive business forward. We're all still being asked to do so many things that are part of our process that it's essential that we truly focus on providing that virtual experience, which we feel flipping the classroom is really a big part of that. So let's take a few minutes and talk about what that really means. So from a pure definition perspective, flipping the corporate classroom really means, or really gives us the opportunity to help learners get their needed education in a virtual world with greater knowledge transfer by allowing students to more actively participate in their education. So kind of to break that out, what we're talking about is that we give students the opportunity to kind of do a full programmatic experience. And really, flipping the classroom is not a new concept. It's been around since the early 90s, but we really feel that it's very relevant as we are moving into this new generation of learning. So by taking that baseline information that was previously done in pretty much a lecture situation and presenting that prior to people getting into a live situation that can be delivered through a lot of different methods, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But this really prepares the learner to come into that classroom, live or virtual classroom, to give them the ability to practice and apply that learning, and then potentially following that up with additional work outside of the classroom to really give an opportunity to check their understanding and extend the learning in the areas that are most impactful to them, which gives the students an opportunity to really own their learning and become experts in areas that are most important to them. So let's talk about some of the opportunities for pre- and post-work. So from a pre-work and post-work perspective, and I always encourage a really nice blend of the different options that are available. We've found that some of the most impactful tools to use from a flipped classroom methodology for pre-work and post-work include micro-learning and e-learning. Again, not new in any way, but applying it to a programmatic approach in learning allows it to really set the stage for learners and get them thinking on how they can apply the learning in their jobs and experiences and really start to formulate thoughts on questions they want to ask in the instructor-led sessions or experiences that they want or can share, which broadens the learning experience not only for the individual student, but also for all of those in the class and the instructor and facilitator, because it allows for the discussions to expand beyond just one individual experience, the instructors, to those of everyone in the room. And we have found that very, very impactful to people really being able to apply the learning in their day-to-day work. Self-paced activities are another great pre or post-work tool. Gives the learners the opportunity to potentially do research or start to think of how they can apply what the course is teaching to actual scenarios that can be leveraged moving forward in the class or applied to their work once class is done. Planning goals, outlining a target strategy, reviewing plans from others, just really great tools to get students engaged. Gamification activities. Always fun to put things in terms of games and competition, especially if you're working with a sales group. And then, of course, mentor and role play activities, another excellent opportunity to really start applying that classroom knowledge to real work. Things like interviewing managers on plans, role-playing actual customer scenarios, either with team members in the class or experts in the area of the target. And then, of course, making sure to bring that activity back into the classroom to discuss what went well, where improvement could be made, is really an invaluable experience, which of course leads us to the class experience. So be it either a live or a virtual class, really taking things that people learned in the pre-work and or post-work and giving them an opportunity to experience that, ask questions of the instructor, and we've been doing a lot with breakout rooms in the virtual classes where, we have the facilitator talk a little bit and then have them break out and in small groups within the class talk about different situations or do some activities and then come back and share that with the class as a whole and really allowing kind of that full class experience in each of those groups. So, Dave, I know we used this a lot in your program. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experiences or do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Sure. We use every single one of these elements. It's interesting that e-learning or micro-learning that you talked about in the beginning, not everybody in the class necessarily participates. And then when they see that we're talking about things that they sort of missed out on, and we are pretty good about being transparent in terms of, hey, here's the people that completed it, here's the people that haven't, you all need to catch up, because everything builds on each other. In our class, we have a lot of ground to cover, and we have a diverse group of students. Some people are very experienced but new to Siemens. Others have been at Siemens for a long time, but they're new to the material, and trying to level set and get everybody on the same page so that when they complete the training, everyone has relatively the same capabilities. That's what really is a difficult challenge. And so the micro-learning helps kind of get people caught up. It covers a big bulk of material. Then we reinforce in our virtual instructor-led training, right? And then doing the breakouts is probably the place where most of the learning really happens, when they break out into separate teams and the sharing between different people within the organization. That's where a lot of the biggest benefit comes out of this program. And then finally, the self-paced activities we reserve for things that they're going to need to do to prepare themselves for success in the future. So they're almost creating their own business plan or their own roadmap in the self-paced activities. It's not just, hey, fill out this form and bring it to class. It's more, fill this stuff out because you're going to use this in the future, and here's how and why, and these things are important to you. So it's been a very big success for us in terms of getting that diverse group through a series of trainings, and in a short amount of time, getting them really ready for being successful. So it takes us, originally the class was compressed to about 4 weeks. We've sort of stretched out that training because I think it's also important to give enough time in between different training elements to make sure everyone can either complete them and also balance their regular job, right, at the same time they're doing this training. So it's a very different model. So once we stretched that out, we found a lot more participation and a lot more preparation. So hopefully that's the kind of things you were looking for, Jill.
Well, actually, why don't we go ahead and talk specifically about your program. So we've kind of level set on what a flipped classroom methodology is, tools that you can use. Why don't you share a little bit about what you were looking to solve for your program, and then we can just kind of dive into your program and give you an opportunity to talk about, pros and cons and all the things that we've talked about with your specific program.
Yeah, I think when I came into my role, I looked at the training and found that it had become a little outdated, and it was designed around this 2.5-day in-person class. And looking at the material, it really didn't fulfill what I think was necessary. We knew we were bringing on 10 brand new people to Siemens, and we also knew that we had a backlog of people that training hadn't been held in about 1.5 years. So it was really time to train some existing folks and these new folks. And looking at the training, I don't think that staying with what we were doing would have been successful. It really was kind of an overview of what would now be 2 sessions within the class out of a total of, I think we have 15, 16 different elements to the training. So it really just didn't address the need. And so we knew we needed to expand. And at the time, one of the questions was, how much of this can we do remotely? That'll save us travel costs. It'll allow salespeople, which is what we were training, it'll allow them to stay engaged with their customer in between classes. And so that's what really put us on the path towards the flipped classroom in the first place.
Excellent. And kind of the way we thought, and we'll just kind of jump right in here. When Dave and I first started working together, we really started off with a very strong discovery process. Dave had a lot of information in his head. He had a lot of different presentations that he wanted to pull information from. So we really started off kind of aligning out the roles that we were focusing on, because like you said, there were a couple of different groups that were going to be joining this training program. And then we really tried to identify where the skill gaps were going to be, because people coming from one part of the organization would have different skill gaps. People coming from outside the organization were going to have different skill gaps. So we wanted to make sure that we were building a program and a plan that would accommodate all of the people that potentially could use the program and be really efficient and effective with their time. And then, of course, we wanted to make sure we were confirming within the training philosophy at Siemens, because we wanted what we were developing as part of Dave's program to look and feel like one of their programs, so then it can be leveraged kind of across the board. Once we did that, then we, of course, got into identifying the course topics. And like Dave said, this was originally done predominantly instructor-led, and a lot of information in Dave's head. So creating kind of the course topic list to identify what was going to be grouped together, where there was additional custom content that needed to be created from either a e-learning perspective or a self-paced worksheet. That all was planned in advance. And then, of course, building and confirming that learning journey. And since this was going to be a programmatic approach across 4 to 6 week time frame, we needed to make sure that everything fit together and worked from a flow perspective so people could follow kind of the sales process as they were going through their education. And then, of course, that all led to the development, which was impacted by the training dates and how we wanted to implement, of course, what tools were going to be leveraged. And we're going to talk a little bit about tools moving forward. But it's really important that if you are incorporating a new virtual experience, that you ensure that people understand the tools that are being used. Because that can be a big hindrance to the success of the program if people are struggling with the technology and not able to focus on the content. And then, of course, making sure we're using the LMS. And then from a measurements perspective, and Dave will talk about this in a little bit, this is always evolving. So, we were part of the program through the pilot. And now Dave and his team are continuing to update things as it goes forward and doing tweaks to ensure that it is continuing to provide the best value for the learners. So always incorporating feedback and working with ongoing improvements. Dave, anything else you want to add?
Well, Jill, just to make this super interactive, I see that we have a question from Jennifer with Cardinal Health. And she asked, what are your thoughts? Oh, I guess I can send it to a slide because I'm really fancy like that. Are you sure? Sure, why not? So it basically says, what are your thoughts of having a participant using preparation to come to a live virtual class and teach back to the audience? So my thoughts on that, and Jill's the professional adult learner, but my thoughts on that is we do that, but not in the way you might think, right? I believe that you need to have certain training and learning objectives, and when you have someone go out and research, they may or may not hit those learning objectives. But the idea of having people prepare things and then come back to class and share them with the group is very much a part of the program that we use today. So some of those outside exercises that we have them do, they'll have something to do, and then the question is, well, how did that go? What worked well? What didn't work well? We have them meet with their branch managers and talk about their business plan. And through the interaction of having them talk about it, they don't want to hear a lecture for hours on end. But when they hear their peers talk about an experience they had, they all sort of, first of all, that person re-experiences it, and everyone else shares in that experience. And they start comparing notes, and that's really where the class sort of comes alive. So that would be my answer in terms of how to really engage the students.
Yeah, and I would agree with Dave. I love a teach back. Anybody who's heard me talk about train the trainer knows I love a teach back. But I agree with Dave that you really want to conform to the learning objectives to ensure that people are getting the most out of the program, and having people share experiences and then working together to kind of pick it apart. I know within our performance consulting group, we do that all the time, have this kind of side note saying, well, this is what I did, what do you think? Oh, what could have been done better? And I think from an education perspective, it's really an excellent learning opportunity because then everybody has the ability to share their experiences, which not only is extremely valuable, but it really, from an ego and giving people, positive reinforcement, I think it's an excellent tool.
Yeah, Jill, I have one other thing I could add if I'm going to just back up one slide, here to the discovery. I think we should probably talk about what that really looked like because, as you said, there was a lot of material that we wanted to add. I'd had an earlier conversation with Jill as we were trying to figure out how big is the bread box, what do they need to do for us. But the real benefit was we brought in a group of their trainers and spent 3 solid days going through all the material with me, presenting them, taking notes. And that really made a huge difference because that really built the content. In a 3-day period, we were really able to identify what the content was, what needed to be developed, what did we have that just needed to be tweaked, and that discovery piece took a decent amount of time. The other thing I'll say is creating e-learning modules. If I would have known just how much time it really takes to do that and do it well, the number of revisions that are required, I probably would have been a lot more hesitant. But in the end, it created a great product that we can point people to today and probably for the next 3 or 4 years to say, hey, go look at this e-learning. It'll help remind you of what we're trying to do. So just that discovery piece is really critical to setting you on the right path early.
Yep. All right, so kind of getting into the program, we did take a very programmatic approach to Dave's onboarding program. We incorporated pre-work, we incorporated lots of in-class experiences, and we really tried to avoid kind of those all-class lectures to ensure that we were getting people hands-on with the content and the materials, giving people the opportunity to share experiences, doing the role plays. We did some really fun things with selling scenarios and giving the teams the ability to try to sell to their very difficult customer, and I'm air quoting that. And then, of course, from a post-program completion, Dave has continued to work with the folks that have gone through the training by doing one-on-one reviews for their final closeout. They've developed a Yammer group where people are sharing experiences. Dave did a challenge where whoever did the first sale got a prize. They do a lot with team group messaging, and then, of course, having the support materials available. So there are a lot of things that all came together as a single program, and then, of course, like I said, Dave is still working to constantly evolve that. So this is a graphic of the program, and Dave, I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of walk through the process and the steps.
Okay. So obviously I don't know how well you can read it, but just to kind of give you the flow of things, in the beginning there's pre-work for people to do, again, trying to level set. And then the first green arrow that you see, session 1, is really just teaching people the environment, get them to introduce themselves, sort of a get to know you and get to know the environment session. And it's really good to settle everybody. And then they take their first e-learning, that's in gray, that gives an overview of the entire course and what we're trying to achieve. And then we have a couple more learning courses. And the content isn't important, but what I would say to you is that these different courses, the ILTs, the big thing that I always try to do is always have at least two activities within that course that are interactive, so it's not lecture. In fact, we took one of the sessions and we did almost a reverse class. I'll put up a slide and I'll start asking them questions. When they answer the questions, they're actually teaching the rest of the class. So sort of what originally was asked by Jennifer, that's just that idea of, getting them to teach. And again, I've got this diverse group, so within any class, I'll have people that can easily answer those questions, and then I'll have those that won't. The other thing that I'll do to try to create engagement is those people that don't talk enough, they'll get called on, right? And that's part of being a facilitator and really important. At any rate, moving through the rest of this, another gray arrow, which shows another e-learning. And then this dark gray arrow, this is that exercise I was mentioning about building their business plan. So this is, sort of a lot of activity outside of the class, but it's stuff that they would normally do without structure. They would have to do to be successful. And we front load that early in the training course. So throughout the course, they're thinking about their business plan and how can they use all these different things they're learning. And then you see some more e-learnings. And then some of these blue learnings, again, are self-paced activities. One of them was finding target customers. It's kind of a prospecting training using the internet and things like that. So I'll kind of skip forward to say, anything that you see that's gray is an e-learning. Anything that's green is an instructor-led training. Blue is sort of that outside classwork. And then we end up, at the end, we do a 3-day culmination. So they've learned all these different sections. Now it's time to bring them together. And we do extensive role plays there to sort of capstone the training so they have confidence that, yeah, they didn't just do it once, then they did it under a scenario with role playing. And as Jill kind of talked about, we have a really tough customer named Tim. He's really a hard guy to work with. And giving them a challenging customer, make sure that they really get the good experiential learning. Making it easy for them doesn't necessarily drive the same output. So that's one of the things that we do. The other thing that I do in these breakouts, so they're broken into like 3 groups, and they work throughout those 3 days in their group. That sort of helps to build the networking between them after class. In addition, for my team, I have table coaches, and I found that the table coach idea helps my team, first of all, get to know some of the folks, but also keeps things on track. It's really hard to have a single instructor going to multiple groups and keeping them on track. I will visit each group and bring reinforcing ideas, but these table coaches really, when sometimes people don't pay attention when you explain what's going to happen next, so there's someone that's in that chat group already in that conference call that can help them to keep learning. So that's the program. It ends with them trying to actually negotiate. We go through that, and then we do some strategic exercises and close out the course. So hopefully that's fairly clear to all of you. I don't want to get into all the details. I don't think it matters. The point is sort of this is spread out over, again, it shows 15 days, but we've spread this out over 6 weeks because we want time in between, not just to do the activities, but for them to do their day-to-day business. Jill, did we lose you?
You sure did. I was on mute. Sorry about that. One of the things that I feel is really important for the success of a program like this is having the right course materials. And I found that doing a virtual program like this with the flipped classroom methodology, we created more deliverables than we would for a standard instructor-led training class. But I feel like that's really vital to ensure that everybody has an understanding of what they're doing at any given time. So the program had the infographic. Each course presentation covered not only what they'd done previously, like at the beginning we'd talk about what you had done to get to that point, and then at the end where their next steps were, so they always understood where the flow was, making sure that job aids were available for kind of high-impact tasks that might be, confusing or hard to remember. We had student activity guides for all of the activities so people could follow along. We had in-class activity worksheets so that as they were working in their virtual environments, they were able to share these and complete the worksheets together. And then, of course, leveraging organizational templates that are going to be used throughout the course of their job to really help them kind of get a step ahead of where they need to be for the next step in the progression of their career. And I know Dave and Dave, they were our two SMEs on this, Dave Santa, who's with us today. We're really great about doing reviews and making suggestions. And from a youth perspective, Dave, do you feel like you had everything that you needed? Did you feel like there was anything that you still needed that we might not have thought of originally? Any kind of lessons learned on the materials?
Well, I think just we did a pilot class together, and Insight sat in and listened through. And so afterwards, we did some revisions. And I think the biggest thing that we learned, you mentioned before that we talked about, here's what you should have completed, here's what we're going to learn today, and at the end, here's hopefully what you've learned, and here's what's next. One of the things that the pilot class said they really needed more was a deliverables matrix. So we took the syllabus and we broke down to help them understand after, what's due when. So that was a modification that Jill's team made. Other than that, there's always going to be changes needed. I typically, when I teach this course, I usually block a couple of hours in the morning before course, go back through all the material, make minor modifications, make sure that everything's set up. It's not the kind of thing, even though I've taught it now 3 times, I don't feel comfortable just opening up a presentation and going for it. I like to review everything and make sure that everything is well organized. So that's a big part of what I do to make sure that we're successful.
Well, that's a perfect segue because that brings us into the facilitation tips.
Okay, perfect. So prepare, right? For me, I have a sales background, so I treat it like I'm going to give a sales presentation, and I never like to go in cold to a sales presentation. So that's one thing. The next thing here, the log in 30 minutes early. I ask my class to join 15 minutes early. I get on 30 minutes early. If they had questions, they can join me. It's just time that I get to prepare and make sure that all my files, all my chat rooms, everything that I need is set up for that day. Anything else there? Open all materials prior to class. That whole thing. You don't want to be searching for a file when you're trying to explain something. Setting up the breakout room. So I don't use the breakout rooms that are part of, we use go-to training. But the breakout rooms there technically they're not as stable as Teams. So we actually create Teams meetings for breakouts. I'll make sure I assign the teams, and typically the last 3 days that I talked about, that's always the same team, and it's kind of geographical to get them in the same time zone to where they can work together. But in other parts, I might mix up the teams based upon who's new to Siemens, who's not, so I get a diverse group because I think that's helpful. The other thing is I take attendance every time they meet. That's the first thing they see when they come up is the attendance of who's here and who's not. And there's also on that sheet who completed their e-learnings and who didn't. It's feedback that I get from the training group. So they kind of know that from day one, they know that this isn't just a course that you can kind of just show up and half step. And I make sure that that's clear, that, at the end of this course, I will be visiting with you to make sure that you have obtained all the learning objectives. And if you've missed something, we're going to take time and review it before you get a pass in the course material. So all of those are the kind of things that I stress that I would recommend for you all in terms of facilitating this sort of training.
And I'd like you to talk about getting commitment for the student. And I know this is something that we had talked about previously, but when you first introduced the class, can you talk about how you introduce it and show them the plan and get the understanding and commitment from them?
So even before we have day one, as I'm signing people up for the class, I send them that infographic that you saw. I send them the course syllabus. And I try to explain to them, if you can't dedicate the time, don't join the course. This isn't a course where I want you to do half the stuff and not finish. Then when we meet, we sort of reinforce that and explain, look, this is spread out over a decent amount of time. You should be able to balance your work. You need to make this a priority. Missing these classes is really not something you want to do. I can record them, miss one, okay. Missing more than one, it's really not acceptable. And that's the sort of speech I give them at the beginning. And I'd rather have them disenroll before we start than enroll and half step, because it's tough when you're counting on breakout groups and then 2 people don't show up and your breakout groups are 5 people. Now you only have 3 people in the breakout. So it's been fairly successful. I have had I've had one person, I think we've probably trained about 30 to 40 people. I've had one person that I've failed. They left the organization shortly thereafter, which was probably one of the reasons they failed, right? And I had one person that just couldn't get their schedule aligned, and then they recycled. So they said, you're right, and they retook the course and in order to get a pass. Other than that, I've done some offline, coaching and training to get people caught up on things that they just didn't fully grasp. And I think that's made it a better quality training.
Excellent, yeah. And I love that, getting the commitment up front. I feel like that's, especially for a program like this, it's vital that you get that and ensure that not only are they committed, but their manager has the understanding of that commitment as well.
Yeah, for those people, if you've ever trained salespeople, they're probably the toughest to nail down, right?
Yes, exactly. So from an outcomes perspective, I know we had started this program, started talking about it last June or July, with the anticipation that we were going to deliver by the end of the year. Timelines got moved a bit, and we didn't end up piloting until March. And I know that we had originally planned to have that last day and a half or so live. Do you want to talk a little bit about the pilot in March and April, and then the outcomes that you've experienced from the program? I know we've mentioned a few of these as we go through, but do you want to kind of just overview it for us?
Yeah, I mean, just to the pilot, I would highly recommend to do the pilot and have whoever helps build your training have them present so they can help. I mean, when you're engaged in delivering, it's very difficult to take notes on how to improve. And so Insight was really helpful in recording all that. So when we came back, we took I think we carved out another day or so to go through it was 2 days, because we went through every element of training and we made the adjustments there in real time together. And so that helped. As far as the outcomes of the training, I guess the best thing I can say is I'm very confident when someone finishes this 6-week course that they are ready to be productive, right? There's no excuse of, I don't know what that tool is, I don't know how to use it, I don't know how we position, how do we differentiate, I'm not sure how to win. You know, that stuff is covered, and that's what I wanted out of the course. So for me, it's a huge success. What will happen moving forward is, you know, a lot of these folks, like you said, the first group there started in April. We ended in April, I guess. So I've done 3 courses. Now we're going to look at, okay, what's the productivity of this group now? So coming this year, we're going to be very focused on how that productivity is working and how successful they've been. So more to follow, I guess, in terms of that piece.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to hearing that. Now, as we've been talking about the flipped classroom methodology and, you know, Dave's specific use case and the outcomes to that, I know I get a lot of questions when people are going through that about why flipping the corporate classroom really works. And I feel like there's a few things that really set it apart. Starting off with it being more than just blended learning. I mean, ensuring that you're using kind of that mixed learning method, I think, has a huge impact on how really enthusiastic learners are, and plus you're kind of hitting all of the different learning styles by doing that. So your auditory learners get their e-learning, your tactile learners get to be participating in the activities. You know, you're kind of hitting every method available and really getting experience with that, combining the digital experience with the ability to have a live instructor, and then, of course, applying what's learned immediately. I know a lot of times when you're in an instructor-led training, you're going through the lecture but not actually getting to experience that. So by flipping the classroom and getting a lot of that lecture experience outside of the classroom and using the classroom where people can actually apply the learning is really important. And, of course, that leads to the increased interaction, you know, having people do activities, less of that passive learning, more of sharing experiences, having learners taking part in the activities and practice, applying it in context. I know when I sat through the pilots with Dave, he was really a lot of times less instructor and more facilitator. Really getting people to share their experiences was I thought, really valuable for all of the people in the class. And it really, I felt, you know, gave people not only the opportunity to absorb information, but also to share what experiences they had, which was awesome. Giving people the ability to really empower their learning, so being able to cover the content in their own time and focus on what they need to know. I know when we had originally plotted this out, we had done the time frame quite a bit shorter. So, based on Dave's experience, expanding that out, giving people more time to really cover the content, and then that really leads to the next of really encouraging mastery. So giving people the time to revisit the material that they needed and to dive deeper in things that were going to help them out be successful salespeople. So that was a big part of it too. And then, of course, promoting that active learning by taking part in the activities and accelerating learning. And then, as we all are living in kind of the new generation of learning, is knowing that virtual delivery works. The ability to deliver a full program virtually and have it be successful and increasing speed to competency, is really a true benefit for that flipping of the corporate classroom. Now, I know Dave and I have had a lot of conversations around, what works well and what doesn't work well, and we kind of came up with our kind of pros and cons list. So real quick, as far as pros, promoting that student-centered environment, getting the students to be able to fit that in their schedules, having students more control of their learning, having the content being accessible, letting people share their experiences. And again, I know you've heard these throughout the course of our presentation, but they really lead to kind of that valuable education experience. And I think less reliability on the instructor and more facilitator helps Dave's time be used better. And of course, saving dollars in travel and having a scalable experience. Now that's my pros and cons list, pros list. If you have some other pros that you'd like to share, please feel free to enter those into the group chat, and we can talk to some of those as well. And as we're going on, we've got the cons. One of the things that I thought was probably a big con, and I think Dave would agree with this, was the significant development work on the front end. Since there were additional deliverables and, quite a bit of review cycles on the e-learning, that took some time. Dave spent quite a bit of time doing facilitator prep, not only on the materials, but also on learning the tools, because obviously Dave needed to understand those. So we were implementing or introducing the go-to training tools, so we took time to meet with them to make sure that, Dave understood the tool and was able to work with that. The students don't receive the face-to-face experience or that live in-person experience for peer networking. And then, of course, you need to make sure that your people understand that remote tools for participation with that. Dave, any others that you want to throw out that I may have missed?
No, I think you've done a good job there. I was just kind of, while you were talking, I was looking at Q&A. There's a couple more in there. One of the questions was, on average, how much time do you spend creating the e-learning session? Me personally, myself and one other, the other David Bauman, we would review them after Insight would prepare them, right? So it was that constant editing back and forth, the review process. We probably went through each one of those, maybe 3 revisions is kind of what it took. Mm-hmm. In terms of time, it depends on the length of your course. I had a lot of course material, obviously, as you can see from the number of courses or sub-courses that we have. But it just was more than I expected, but it wasn't daunting. You really just had to make it a priority. If you're going to do some builds, right, if you're going to build a program like this, you need to set aside time to do the reviews, because it's all about, if you're trying to, we were on a deadline, and to try and get things out quickly, it was pretty much when Insight had finished something, we had made a commitment, 24 hours, we'd get something reviewed and back to them, because there were multiple people working on this for a certain amount of time. We didn't want to string that out because we had a target to meet. And I see a bunch more questions, so I'll give them to you if you want to take over. Jill? Well,
and I'm just kind of like going to backtrack on the e-learning sessions. From a development perspective, depending on the course, probably for our e-learning, and some of the courses had a lot more interactivity than others. Some of them were just kind of more of a little lecture kind of thing. We went anywhere from 100 to 150 hours of work effort to develop that, and we developed the e-learning over a course of 8 to 10 weeks. Well, probably a little longer for some of them. We did it over the holidays, and then, Dave, a lot of the review cycles were based on Dave and Dave's timeline. So on average, for a normal e-learning course, we're looking at anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks of development time. Some of this was a little higher than that. And I flipped back to the pros.
Yeah, I put the pros back up because Sharon asked if we could, from Iowa, from the University of Iowa, she just asked, can we put the pros back up? So I took the liberty of doing that.
Thank you.
Great comment from Robert Klein on the pros, puts the learner in the driver's seat. They own their learner journey. Cons, resistant to change from the learner comprehension of the virtual to delivery function. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with both of those. I thought Dave's team actually did a really stellar job on owning their learning journey. Most of them really participated very actively, whether they wanted to or not. Dave kind of forced that in a lot of cases. He was a great facilitator.
The one thing I will say is at the end of this course, I pretty much know who's going to succeed and who's going to struggle. And if you think about the amount of face time that I have with them, it's not that much compared to maybe what a branch manager or sales manager can have. But because they're in these little more learning/stressful environments, you can see who the leaders are, and it's really enlightening. I usually provide that feedback back to the branches.
That's great. So, quick poll. I mean, we've spent the last 45 minutes talking about the flipped classroom and Dave's specific program. Just quick poll. Based on what you heard today, what % of your current learning would you like to have delivered via a flipped classroom? If you haven't already converted, or if you're currently in the conversion process, go ahead and include, or if you're in the process, go ahead and include that in your percentage. From an insight perspective, I know I am a huge fan of the flipped classroom methodology. I feel like it from a learning perspective, it really helps to cement education and provide that excellent knowledge transfer. Having people kind of drive their own learning, I feel like is a huge bonus, because I feel like as adult learners, we need to want to learn the material, and giving them this opportunity to not only learn it outside of class but share experiences is a really nice hands-on opportunity. So go ahead and I'll give 5 more seconds. So put your entry and then click submit. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we've got some good numbers.
Less people. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully we didn't talk you out of it.
Yeah, exactly. So we are happy to help if you're ready to flip your corporate classroom. Insight has a proven methodology on converting ILT to vILT using the flipped corporate classroom. So let's continue the conversation. Feel free to reach out to me, or you can do DG-NA-L&D pursuit@insight.com. I would be happy to help. Or you can, like I said, email me with any questions, or Dave with any questions. Our email addresses are on the screen right now. And I really appreciate everybody's time. Look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions. I want to thank Dave tremendously. Not only was an excellent partner on this project, but his willingness to jump in and participate in the webinar is greatly appreciated. We really appreciate everybody's time today, and thank you so much. And I'm going to hand this back to Olivia to close us out, and then we'll hang on to answer any questions that you might have as well. Thanks again.
That concludes today's webinar. A big thank you to the presentation team today, and to the attendees, thank you for the time and opportunity to come together. With that, we'll turn you back to your day. Thank you.